Before we get back to our national discussion, I do want to take a moment and share with our Chicago audience and also our national audience, because again, there was some notoriety to the passing this week of Chicago's first female mayor, Jane Byrne. Jane Byrne beat the machine back in 1979 in the city of Chicago. It rocked politics in this city, and what followed Jane Byrne was Harold Washington, the first African-American elected president. Mayor. I said, mayor of Chicago, and I said that at that particular time that there would not have been a President Barack Obama had there not been a Mayor Harold Washington. And everyone around the table that night sort of agreed with it. So I would say the same thing tonight. I don't think there would have been a Harold Washington had there not been a Jane Byrne. Not only because Jane Byrne did what she did, which was sort of to dare Harold Washington to run. It was a very bad political calculation on her part. But again, she did prove to people living in Chicago that a focused campaign, you could beat the machine. And she did it at a time when no one thought it was possible. Again, the first woman mayor of a major city. One of the principal reasons why she was able to beat the machine was the incumbent mayor, Michael Blandick, and his Department of Streets and Sanitation did a very ineffective way or process of cleaning the streets after a huge snowstorm in 1979. And there seemed to be some favoritism not only in snow clearance, but also in transit, public transit service to the south and west sides, which were populated then and now by the black population. And she riled everybody up because Mayor Blandick couldn't handle the snow. Very small media campaign compared certainly to today. But again, the picture of her when the snow is not, it was the picture of her in that commercial, because it was filmed on a day that was snowing. It constantly reminded everybody how upset they were with the way the city was administered. And again, when she ran for re-election, her whole thought was that Richard M. Daley, who was the state's attorney, would be someone that wanted her job. And he did want her job. And much of her strategy in that first term was positioning herself to beat him in a primary, because she knew that he was coming after her. And so some of the things that she did deliberately riled up the black community. She wanted a black opponent. She did not know that by creating, and she did things that really riled up the black community. She threw out white members of the Chicago Housing Authority who were African American.
She moved into Cabrini Green.
She moved into Cabrini. Yeah. She did all kinds of things, a lot of it that was kind of riling up the black community because she wanted a black candidate. She didn't realize that by egging a black candidate in, the candidate would be Harold Washington. And when he got in, that fire that she ignited turned into a prairie fire, and it swept her and all of her mathematics of how she was going to win a three-way race went out the window. And Harold Washington finished first in that primary. Jane Byrne finished second. Rich Daley finished third. He ultimately came back later. And I think also something else, and I'll say it, and a lot of people may not want to acknowledge what I'm about to say is accurate, but I do think that the way in which Jane Byrne was basically shunned and exiled by the power elite once she fell. She made a comeback 4 years later. She lost in a primary to Harold Washington in 1987. And then there was a flirtation that she was going to run for a county office as well. But again, what happened is she became a pariah in the city that she once was the mayor of. And that attitude and that aura was orchestrated by Richard M. Daley. He had such a vile hatred of Jane Byrne. He made the rest of her life miserable. And it's not to his credit, that he did what he did. But again, there won't be a lot of people saying, Bruce, you're right on, you'll do that. But I think most people in their heart know exactly what I'm talking about. And he went way beyond what should have done, and she was given no respect, with the exception of within the last 6 months when it was apparent that her days on this earth were going to be very short-lived, that there was a movement by Ed Burke, the longest-serving member of the Chicago City Council, to name a small park after her. And there was a ceremony, and the mayor now, Mayor Rahm Emanuel, understood and addressed some of the concerns that I just referenced, that she was an innovator, she did make history, and again, sometimes when you make history, you make some very powerful enemies that make your life miserable. And she did, and she will rest in peace. And to her daughter, Kathy, the service will be tomorrow. And again, our prayers go out to her, because she had a pretty remarkable mother who made a significant mark on the city of Chicago. And again, just to put it in context to our national audience, there would not be a President Obama. Now, you may like the idea, or maybe you hate the idea that there's a President Obama. But if you look at the politics of it, and you go back and you look at the seeds that were planted, they lead to the door of Jane Byrne.